City University Television. In association with the Center for Advanced Study in Theater Arts. And the Harold Clurman Endowment. Presents Spotlight.
Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Ed Wilson, and my guest is one of the most innovative playwrights and directors in the American theater, Maria Irene Formes. Irene, welcome. I want to talk about your plays, particularly during the 80s and your current work. I know you were one of the most experimental and original playwrights of the 60s and 70s, but I want to focus on this. But before we do that, I want to ask you a little bit about how you got into directing, because I think, do you direct all of your own plays?
Yes.
How did you become a theater director as well as playwright?
Well, the very first play of mine that was done, that wasn't done. It was a scene was worked on at the Actors Studio. That was before the first production in San Francisco. It was a very
first. Was this Tango Palace?
No, this was an adaptation that I did after Tango Palace, but before Tango Palace was produced. An adaptation of some letters that my great-grandfather's cousin wrote to him from Spain. She had moved to Spain, and she was writing a series of letters to him, and they were very interesting. And the letters were written about the period of the Cuban War of Independence, what is here known as the Spanish-American War, but it's known as the Cuban War of Independence in Cuba.
Of course, you grew up in Cuba,
yes,
and so this was your interest, part of your interest, as well as the family,
right,
in writing these.
Right,
yes.
right.
And were these translations then?
The letters were in Spanish, but what I did, I turned the letters into a theater piece.
Yes.
It is, very sort of naive kind of way, which is that the woman is dictating letters to scribe, and
yes,
so there's a relationship between the scribe and the woman, just in the way he does things. But
so a scene was being worked on.
A scene was being done at the Actors Studio, and I had never been involved with any kind of rehearsal process, or I didn't even know any actors. And the very first 5 minutes of this experience, the actress started reading this letter, which of course they were all monologues, and she started walking and she started moving towards, it was like she was walking around, stood behind the chair, and then but she continued. And I got up immediately and I said, "Oh, it was so wonderful. You stopped there briefly. If you stop there a little bit longer and you continue speaking from back there before you move." And so I looked, everybody was looking at me, staring. And I thought, what have I done? I had no idea what I had done. I knew I had done something wrong.
Just by everybody's reaction.
Yes, because everybody just was startled, staring at me, and I thought, what is wrong?
And you had no idea that in the decorum of directing and playwriting and so forth, the playwright is never supposed to speak up at a rehearsal, correct?
Right.
I mean, that's the accepted procedure.
That is totally.
And so, in your naivete and innocence, you jumped up.
Right. And then the director very, very sweetly came to me and he said, put his hand on my back, and he said, and he sort of moved me towards the chair, and he said, you observe, and anything that you see that you would like to discuss with me, you write. He said, I'll get you a notebook and a pencil, and you write it down, and then afterwards you and I have coffee and we discuss these things. And he was very, very sweet. Of course, I thought I was in a mental institution. I thought these people were crazy. Why would I
You were the writer. Why wouldn't you know how you wanted it performed?
Why? But also, why wouldn't I be telling him right then and there? Because I could imagine that he would say, well, I'm the director, and I want it done different. But why couldn't we talk about it right
Openly.
then and there? It was just something I could not understand. Then, of course, and I was right, because when we talked afterwards, and I would talk about certain moments or certain things, of course, he didn't remember.
He didn't remember?
No, he didn't remember.
So if you had been able to say it at that point, it would have made sense.
It would have made sense. But then I was talking about things, about, for example, that moment when she stopped by the chair. If that had been in my list of things, he would say, when did she stop by the chair? So I thought there was something very, very, very wrong. But I mainly thought it's something I don't like. I didn't like that. I didn't mind at all. Then Herbert Blau the next experience was Herbert Blau, because he was extraordinary to watch.
You had great respect for him as a director. Then.
It was incredible. I watched it, and I had no desire to go.
This was at the Actors Workshop in San Francisco.
In San Francisco.
With Herbert Blau.
Yes, right.
But in the meantime, you must have decided that you really felt you knew best about directing your own plays.
Not really. I had not made a decision, because when you're new at something, you don't. It takes a while before you. At first, you're just finding out how things are. And certainly that experience had been very bad, but the experience with Blau was it was exquisite. It was just wonderful. So I had no reason to think that I would want to do one thing or another. It did happen that I think I probably always felt that I would like to do it too. No, but not instead of other directors, but that I would also like to do it because it seemed like fun, and why should I be deprived of this part of the fun of something that I work hard constructing. So, but it did happen several other times that I just didn't like what was being done, and I thought the play was being destroyed by this director's idea of how to do it or how to work with the actors.
Of course, you had a background in painting, and so you have a visual sense then, which of course is part of what a director must have, is a sense of space and relationships, physical relationships. So you had that advantage also.
Yes.
So, but in other words, you do not believe and do not accept the notion that a playwright should not direct his or her work.
No, of course not. Of course not. And of course it's not. That's a fallacy, because, for example, this in the off-Broadway movement, because things were not so systematic, and everybody did what they could. It was everybody did when they did something, it was to help out. It wasn't so much a privilege or a job or now you're good enough, now you could do costumes, or now you can direct. If you sometimes the playwright didn't know a director, didn't have a director, and somebody would say, I'll help, I'll try. It was I'll help.
Yes.
I'll help, rather than I am a director, therefore I will read your script and see if I choose to do it. It was helping. I did costumes. I was helping, but I didn't think I am a costume designer. I was helping, and people liked so much the way my costumes looked that I could have easily just shifted and become a costume designer because people were after me, of course. But the idea was because I knew how to sew. I could sew, so I was a costume.
But you believe that really, in your case, now you have then, beginning, I guess, in the late 60s, or somewhere in there, since then you've really directed, have you directed the first version of each one of your plays?
Yes. Well, it happened,
as now you are directing plays by other people, too.
Yes, right.
I mean, recently you've been directing plays written by students of yours.
Yes. But I've also directed three classic plays. One, Calderon, Life is a Dream. And then I also directed Hedda Gabler and Uncle Vanya.
So you've really become a full-fledged director as well as playwright.
I am even in the union.
Now, I want to talk about your plays of recent years, because you did in the 60s and the 70s a number of very experimental plays, experimenting with form, with the way plays were put together, skipping time, using cinematic techniques, a number of things. Your plays in the 80s, and I don't mean we will separate them, Mud, The Conduct of Life, a whole series of plays that you've been doing in the 80s, it seems to me there is a tremendous amount of power in these plays. It's not that you weren't always serious, because I think you've always been serious, but you've mixed a lot of the humor, which has been a very strong factor in your plays. But Danube, for example, is one of your plays of the 80s, which really deals with, it takes place in Budapest. It's there's a love affair. As a matter of fact, love and sensuality and sexuality have played a very strong part in your plays in the 80s. Is there, let's talk about that for just a moment, because in Sarita you have a young woman, a young Hispanic woman who realizes, I suppose, on one level that the young man Mark she's involved with is really better for her, but she has this irresistible attraction to Julio, who is not the best person for her. Would you say that's a...
Yes.
So that there's and then, of course, in The Conduct of Life, you've got this very sadistic man, Orlando, who has this young mistress whom he sexually and otherwise abuses, physically abuses, and his wife... There has been a very strong strain, it seems to me, of sensuality as well as some violence with this. What can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, there are two reasons why that has happened. Three reasons, I think. One is that my very first play was a very violent play, Tango Palace.
It ended with a murder.
Yes.
Which some of the recent plays have, too.
Right. And it was a relationship that was very painful. It was very painful for me to write, because although I was obsessed and completely grabbed by the writing of the play, by the working of the play, it was agony to write it. After I finished writing the play, especially the end, the death, I knew that Leopold had to kill Isidore, and writing that death was to me as difficult as if I had to kill a person, which is, is something that in my teaching I try to remember, that how difficult it is in the beginning to really
put on paper or to put in the
but also because you have to put yourself into the work, but also to know that it's only the work, that it's not
a real murder.
It's not a real murder. I suppose actors, beginning actors must go through that too. I'm not sure. I've never asked, but I would imagine the first time that a young actor is acting parts that are evil or violent or in any way ugly, it must be very difficult. So, and I felt I don't want to go through this again after I finish the play. And that is the reason why the plays that followed were mostly comedies that were because I'm a too serious a person to just write a play for the
fun
purpose
games,
of laughing, that I became a lot more interested in structure and having the play make a statement rather than the way things come about, make a statement rather than the characters themselves.
Or a violent action.
So that the characters were deliberately a little bit cartoon. So the humanity was not so much in the character, but in the situation. There was always, I think, a great deal of humanity in even those works, and tenderness, but then it happened that when I started writing, because of my involvement in the theater strategy.
This was in the mid-70s.
In the mid-70s, it changed. I think that I just simply went back to what was originally my impulse to write, which was to deal with things that were much more
intense
and painful and more I don't know where the guts are, where
yes.
things that are ugly.
I must say, in in just mentioning 4 plays now, Mud, Danube, The Conduct of Life, plays like this, and Sarita. These are 4 plays, each one of which they're each one's different because, as I say, Danube takes place in Budapest, and hovering over it, Eve and Paul become involved romantically, and then he has this disease,
yes.
which clearly, although you never say so explicitly, has to do with nuclear radiation or with, I mean, hovering over this play is really a lot of modern sensibility about the nuclear age that you have. The Conduct of Life takes place in Latin America, as I say, with a tremendously sadistic military man who clearly tortures other people and then tortures this young woman and members of his own family. It's and Mud is about a woman who living with 2 men, both of whom feel they cannot live without her. So that they're different statements, but in each one there's a tremendous amount of power, it seems to me. And so as a group, they clearly are not cartoons anymore, for all of the devices you still use. And so do you see this as as where you were, I should say, and have been in the 80s and recently?
Yes, but I think that it has to do also with where we are in the world. I think that what is happening to the world is something very alarming. That the pain and the brutality that exists in my plays is totally a reflection of a brutality that I see in the world. I feel that the world has lost its innocence, and that maybe in the 60s there was still the 60s I think was probably the beginning of like shedding. If you think of innocence as being something that is like a skin or a coating or something, that in the 60s it was the beginning of shedding that innocence. It looked like innocence, you know, the whole 60s movement, the flower children, the love, all of that seemed like innocent, but I don't believe that it was. I mean, people were innocent in doing it, but I think that it had to do with something evolving that was not all that sweet and generous. That it was the beginning of what we're going through now, which is something that I'm very frightened. I'm very frightened of.
Tell me, in terms of these plays we're talking about now, which do reflect the modern condition. Tell me about the role of women in these plays, and also the role of women in their relationships to men, because again, that plays a very important part in all of these plays. Sarita, The Conduct of Life, these plays, and Mud. There's a woman, and her role with men is crucial in each one of these. Would you say?
Yes. I don't think that I'm writing. I don't think I'm writing about women deliberately. That is, I'm not saying.
Well, you're a woman, so it's not surprising that you would write about from that point of view, wouldn't you say?
Right.
But go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, but what I mean is that I don't think I'm making a statement about women. You know what I mean?
In other words, you're not making what is called a feminist statement.
No. Well, I think I'm making the supreme feminist statement, which is that the female is usually the central character of my plays.
Yes.
Which I think that is the most important feminist statement. But I think,
talk about that just a little bit.
Well, I think when a play, when the main character of a play is a man, you never think that it's a play about men. You think it's a play about humanity. The man represents the human being. and that the man is involved with a woman is not that this is the relationship of a man to women. It's just that it's natural that they are connected. But if a woman is a central character of a play and she is related to a man as a husband or a lover, then it seems that it's a play about a woman having her relationship to a man. And it always surprises me when people see it that way, because I usually have to think about it, because I think maybe it is and I hadn't thought about it, but I don't think it is. I think it's just that women are the central characters of my plays, that they take over, that they are the human being. But it's embodied in a woman. I think it's a person, really. Maud, for example, several times people have said that this is a play about a woman oppressed by these two men. I was amazed the first time I heard that, because to me, if anybody is oppressing of the three of them, it's her.
She oppresses. Now, we should say the three people in that there's May and Lloyd and Henry.
And Henry, right.
And she's involved with both of these men in different ways. They all three end up living together.
Right.
And she seems to be taking care of them.
Right.
And they seem desperately to need her. And as a matter of fact, at the very end of the play, when it looks like she's going to leave them to seek new horizons, they kill her because they
can't live without
they can't live without her. But you say that when people tell you that it
well,
looks as if the men are oppressing her, you're surprised.
Right. You see, if you would reverse the roles and say May is a young man who, because their life is very primitive, they live in this cottage in a cabin, very isolated, they're very poor, they're starving, there's no one around, they have to work very hard, the land is not fertile, the life is very hard. They have lived together since they were very little, because Lloyd was an orphan and her mother died, her father was very ill. And what she explains is they made it. He said, we made it. We are not husband and but we made it. But in any case, if May were this is a young man and he has this woman who is a little bit retarded, because Lloyd is a little retarded.
And who was very dependent on him. Yes.
Right, very dependent, and then this young man meets an older woman who he thinks can teach him something, because the reason why this other man comes into their lives is because she wants so badly to study, to learn, and she doesn't have the mind. She can't remember things. She feels that she understands things, but you can tell by the way she describes it that she doesn't even understand too well. She just senses that there is something,
a world out there,
knowledge, enlightenment. Really, it's like she senses enlightenment, but she has no idea what it is really. And she meets someone who barely can read, because Henry is like a third grade scholar, and she thinks that and he thinks that this woman can teach him something, so brings this older woman to the house, sleeps in the bedroom with this older woman, and tells the other one, the poor little mentally retarded one, you sleep now here on the floor. And so, do you think if this were a man, that anybody would say this young man is oppressed by these two women? Never,
no.
But never. So you see, there is just such a peculiar...
It really has to do with preconceptions and stereotypes.
Right.
And so, because the women you write, who are the center of your plays, they're certainly not simple, and they're not all heroines in the sense of they're not angels.
Right.
Correct?
Correct.
In almost every case.
Right.
But what about, certainly in terms of Sarita, this is a young woman, very young. I mean, she's in her teens, and she feels this tremendous pull of just physical attraction, would you say, and sexuality.
Right.
But now, what about an older woman like Letitia, in the conduct of life with her husband Orlando. Is she a victim?
She's not a victim. Of course, you know, you could do the play, because I've seen the play done with Leticia being just a nice, and also the servant is, you know, it's...
But you don't see them as being victims.
The servant is a very strong woman. She tells Leticia what Leticia says, I want to go buy, I want this and this for dinner. And she said, no, you're not having that. She's a very strong woman. She's a servant. And of course, it has to do also to do with something that is an economic and social condition that in Latin America, working as a servant in somebody's house is having a job. There's nothing demeaning about. I mean, it's demeaning because it's a job that doesn't pay too well. But everybody has to work, and everybody works for a living, and most of those people who work as servants, if they would find out that there is a society where if you have a servant, you're considered to be a tyrant and a bastard, and they would say, but how do we eat if we don't work?
Yes.
Right. So I see
Leticia?
No, the servant. Olympia.
Olympia.
Olympia she's a very strong woman, and Leticia is also a very strong woman. Leticia is in love with Orlando.
Right.
You see, even Orlando.
So she stays because of that.
Orlando is younger than she is.
And
of course, she could be played in different ways.
She's attracted.
But she is like she wants him. She wants him.
I hate to say it.
Again.
I hate to say it. Our time is just about up. But on this note of your explaining, it's very helpful to hear you talk about particularly these plays in terms of the women's point of view, because I think it's very interesting because you're looked on as someone, well, you are in many people's minds the major woman playwright, certainly of recent times.
Oh, wow.
So our guest has been Maria Irene Formes. This has been Spotlight. Thank you so much for being with us.